I want to talk about the box office of this movie because, as I mentioned at the top, this is the third of four feature films coming out from DC this year. And it's been a really, really, really rough stretch for DC lately when it comes to the theatrical box office. And right now, with Blue Beetle, its first domestic opening weekend brought in $25 million, which represents the second lowest DC opening thus far. It's only ahead of Wonder Woman 84, which opened to 16.7 million, but we can't forget that that movie opened in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, so it already has an asterisk next to it. When you look at some of the other films that have recently come out, The Flash opened to $55 million, which again sort of underperformed against industry expectations. Same with Shazam Fury of the Gods, had a $30 million opening, and Black Adam last year with $67 million on its opening weekend, which did represent the highest of Dwayne Johnson's career, but that movie kind of tapered off after the second and third weekend. So there's been a really, really rough patch with these movies. And I think on an even larger scale with superhero movies entirely, we've been kind of having this conversation. I know we've talked about it on Two Black Nerds. I'm sure you all have talked about it on Unqualified Heroes. And I recently read an article from the Hollywood Reporter by Richard Newby where it was titled, "Where Have All the DC Fans Gone?" Because this is not a new trend where a movie comes out and underperforms. He posited that maybe it's because DC has always had a particular strength with filmmakers and letting their visions really kind of drive the strategy and the marketing of their movies, and that's how they really build
Mhm,
fandoms. When you go back to Richard Donner with Superman, Tim Burton
mhm,
with Batman, Zack Snyder, Chris Nolan, they have a long history of filmmaker driven projects,
mhm.
whereas the pieces of connectivity haven't necessarily worked as well for them, like the MCU is just extraordinarily done for so long. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I don't know how many people are necessarily paying to the filmmakers behind some of these projects, but I'm sure that that is at least somewhat of a factor. But Danny, I kind of want to ask you, what are your thoughts just about the fact that this movie once again sort of underperformed against industry expectations, but it's just the latest in a long line of films that have come out that nobody really takes the time out to go see.
Oh my gosh, there's so many different like elements to this big picture. As far as Blue Beetle specifically, honestly, I think it's quite sad because I think this movie was pretty good, and even had, in some sense, a groundbreaking uh, element to it, being like a Latino led movie. And
Mhm.
that's not something that we've really gotten, with diversity, and a lot of characters are white. So and in that part, I think is pretty sad. But with so many things going on, one, I think um, people are just waiting for James Gunn's DC, and they're like, I don't even care. Why even watch these DC movies? I might as well just wait for James Gunn's DC. Two, there's like the whole strike thing going on, so there's less promotion for it, and all these like, oh, maybe do I support the actors and do I do this? It's like some people don't even know what to do. Then there's the whole question of superhero fatigue. Is there superhero fatigue? That's another thing. Um, and then it's like I just think with DC, they've had this trend of like not good movies, that now that there's like this character of Blue Beetle who most people don't know of as well as Superman and Wonder Woman, Batman, that it's like, oh well, if this character that I love, like the Flash, is so bad, how could a character that's like not even all that, even like how could that movie be so great? Like I'm not, word of mouth is a big thing. And word of
Mhm.
mouth for this movie, it wasn't really there. So there's just so many, I mean, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. There's so many different elements that goes into these superhero films, that's like, because we originally, the question was like, is just movies, are movies dying? And to me, that I was genuinely thinking that. I was like, maybe it's not just superheroes. Like I don't really remember like this big box office movie lately. But then we got Avatar 2. Then Barbie came out as like making a crap ton of money. Oppenheimer technically didn't make as much money as Barbie, but like there was a lot of word of mouth for it. A lot of people went to go see it. So it's like, okay, it's really, it's not the death of movies, because maybe it was the streaming service, but then it's like these big movies came out and it's like, okay, it's not that. It's like there's other factors that people have to look into, the industry has to look into it, and real understand like what's actually going on as to why people are not going out to see these DC Marvel films as they used to in the past.
Yeah, I think by and large, for sure, that movies in general don't play as important of a role as they used to in pop culture,
Hmm.
just because there are so many other things that people can invest their time into when you have TikTok and video games and Instagram, and there's just so many other options out there. I don't think movies are as important, but we do see exceptions when studios craft experiences that people feel like they have to be a part of, like the Barbenheimer phenomenon, which is, still steamrolling over all the competition. Des, from a DC standpoint specifically, this is the latest entry in a long line of films that have underperformed. I think we
Yeah.
talked about this with The Flash, that this is not new information. I know we
Hmm.
constantly revisit this conversation, and the headlines always come out like lowest DC opening ever, but fans have kind of abandoned DC years ago. I think
They
really
jump
with
ship.
with the exception of these really, strong filmmaker led projects like the Batman from Matt Reeves or
Hmm.
Joker from Todd Field, unless we're talking about these platinum characters that are always going to sort of persevere and permeate pop culture, when they try to explore some of these lesser known characters that haven't necessarily had the opportunity to be at the forefront, it just hasn't worked. So, what do you ultimately, sort of attribute to that? Do you think it's just the nature of where DC is? Are people waiting for James Gunn and what they have in store? Or
Hmm.
are people just overall kind of just over, what superhero movies have to offer in this day and age?
Man, it still really is any and everything. It's all the above. Everything we're all saying is true. I have to also think that we expected, well, we did we I don't say I can't say I expected, but when you first hear that a Blue Beetle movie is coming out, as somebody who's supposed to be Mexican American, you would hope that this would feel to other Mexican Americans as Black Panther filled to other African Americans, right? But there's a difference in the energy. Energy is so important, especially when it comes with these superhero movies. And I think when you look at the energy surrounding Blue Beetle and everything leading up to it, everything we're talking about, every weird DCEU ending, starting thing happening, slash Black Adam isn't that good, slash these last couple DC movies just haven't been that good. The energy has not been there. They haven't done the groundwork with their more known characters to say, man, we might have something with this lesser known character over here. They simply haven't done it. As again, I'm kind of making this comparison. It is a very broad generalization, but when Black Panther comes out, phase 3 of the MCU is cracking. You telling me Homecoming is out, Ragnarok is out? It's just a lot going on at that time. And then you telling me that you're going to put that in the middle, Black Panther in the middle of all of that? Absolutely. I just have a feeling if Blue Beetle had been backed by some of that same energy, we'd be having a different conversation. But DC has not stepped up to the plate right now, as we can see. It has not really been in their favor. And what I it's interesting because I say all these things are right, and there is a very interesting point that a lot of the good DC films are tied to like these big filmmakers, right? You could argue Zack Snyder should have been one of those people, and it didn't work out. But you can be like, it didn't necessarily work out, but could also argue why is it every project that's not a part of your main core story of the DCEU is backed by those big filmmakers? You know what I'm saying? Why isn't Matt Reeves making a Batman movie within the DCU? Why isn't Todd Phillips' Joker being in the DCU? Why isn't a high caliber Christopher Nolan-esque type person helping shepherd your movies within the DCU and making it what it is? A Tim Burton. Why isn't that a thing? If you see all those movies succeeding on the outside, why don't you bring that idea inside? It doesn't really make any sense at the end of all of it. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of things. Again, everything we've said it's just it's weird, man. And they got some working out to do. But man, a lot of it is it's that energy that DC is putting out right now, and it hasn't been there. If you tell me one is bad, one movie is bad, and two movie is bad, why should I get up to have to go see the third movie? If you there's no trust anymore, and so of course people didn't show up to see the film. This is how it is.
Yeah, I would love to get like some focus groups about what exactly is happening here. That's to that point you just made about the filmmaker driven projects. I think it's interesting that it feels like that's what they were first going after when Zack Snyder was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like coming in at the beginning, early
Yep.
stages, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman. But because of all these regime changes at the company
Mm-hmm.
itself, I don't think that there's ever been one true vision until really now, where we're getting with James Gunn and Peter Safran, because even Walter Hamada, again, this movie was greenlit under his administration. At that particular time, we've talked about it numerous times across the podcast, where it just kind of felt like the DC was trying to be all things to all people. They had 7 different connective universes. They had 3 Jokers and 6 Batman, and you just didn't necessarily know like what the end goal was, if there was any to begin with. And it kind of just felt like they were just throwing anything to see where it could stick towards the wall. And I think in addition to that, that kind of led to a bit of a smaller focus on filmmaker driven projects from that standpoint. And Danny, earlier you talked about the strike. I mean, it's really, really unfortunate for Zolo Maraduena, as the star coming in here, to have like this first big breakout role. Of course, he's on Cobra Kai, which he's really good on, but this is like his first huge feature film in America, and him not having that opportunity to properly promote the movie, along with the rest of the cast as well. That is a crutch that will ultimately hinder, I think, the performance of any movie when your stars can't actively be out to promote it. And that's not their fault. That is on the part of the studios. Like, the studios should be doing everything in their power to allow the filmmakers and the actors and all of the people who are part of the crew to be able to promote these things. But we're seeing the effects of that as well, along with all the other stuff that's been mentioned. But I want to pull back even more on this conversation. We've talked about DC, superhero movies in general, because Marvel is struggling as well. We are not going to leave them out of this conversation. They are not clean in this in this at all. There have been exceptions. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, very successful movie. Even Across the Spider-Verse, hugely successful, overperformed on that front from Sony and Marvel. But they have had some missteps as well with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Critically, they've also had some missteps. They have seen the box office somewhat decrease over the course of some of their recent films. And so we talk about this idea of superhero fatigue, and I don't know if I buy into that in general. Again, I think that there's a bigger conversation with movie going as a whole, but are we just at the point where superhero movies as a genre, quote unquote, are not at the forefront of the box office as much as they used to be? Because for about 15 years there, they were untouchable. You could pretty much put out anything and branded Marvel or DC, and it was like guaranteed to make a lot of money for you, like $500, $600, $700 million a bill. Like at one time, Marvel was just putting out film after film, easy $1 billion. That's not the case anymore. And I think that we're still going to see successful movies. I still think many of them will probably make good money. But are we just at the point where they're not at the forefront of the conversation? And if we have reached that point, is there something else? Is there another genre? Is there another trend that could perhaps come in and fill that void? Danny, what do you sort of think about that, and just like the sort of place that superhero films occupy, at least in terms of the box office?
That's a good question. I think there's multiple layers to this onion we're peeling back. The first thing is, we live in a very impatient world, and if we think about phase 1, I don't think phase 1 really made all that much money, and probably even phase 2 of Marvel, it was like the hype was still there, but like it really started making money come phase 3 and like the end of phase 2, when we had Avengers 2, is like that's when it really started making a bunch of money. So I think one is just people, it's hard to go back down to ground zero and kind of like reset, and phase 4 is like this reset of like a new saga, and so people are like resetting. It's hard to do that because now, and then you got the addition of the Disney Plus shows. It's like, okay, now I gotta watch this to watch that to watch this, and it's like I gotta do all this, and it's hard for the casual viewer to go enjoy a certain film when they have to watch so many predecessing movies. And is along with the CGI issues. I mean, Marvel has had serious CGI issues. I mean, the whole point of not the whole point, but some of the point of this strike is the overwork, the like not enough, too many hours, not enough time to get things done. I mean, you've heard stories about people who are like, I'm literally working on this film until 2 hours before it releases. Like it's just like, bro, you can't be doing that. This is not good for like mental health or anything. Like what? Like you talk about like last minute, that's last minute. And so I think that's one issue. And then you got the other issue where it's just like back then, well, I say back then, it's not too long, but like last decade, superhero films were kind of like this generational thing that we grew up with, and nothing that really was there before the last decade. I mean, Iron Man came 2008, so very late in the early 2000s, and then going into the 2010s. So it's like we didn't really have a ton, like not like a universe of superhero films until then. And then now we have, geez, how many? Probably like 50 projects with Marvel and DC combined.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like some people kind of just want something new, something fresh, and I'm sure we'll talk about it when we get to the Blue Beetle topic specifically. But a lot of these films are kind of like overlapping each other in like script in a sense. So it's like I'm watching the same thing. I'm not getting something fresh to a degree that I just want something new. Barbie was fresh. Oppenheimer was fresh. It's just like I want something new, and I think a lot of people are having that sense of feeling.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. There was also just that story about one of the VFX workers who worked on WandaVision, and he quit after 8 days. And he talked about how they just
Mhm.
expected him to work 16, 17-hour days, and he was getting paid crap money, and he was like, "I'm not fucking doing this. Like, there's no way I'm gonna walk away." And now we see, like, the Walt Disney Company, all of their in-house VFX workers are voting to unionize because of how pervasive a problem it has become. Des, what do you think about this? Just, superhero movies sort of being at the forefront of the box office. Is that
Mhm.
era over? And if so, what would you say is kind of the era that we exist in now? Because I do think that movies will still come out and make money. Like, we still have
For sure.
examples. Guardians 3, Across the Spider-Verse, very successful films. The Batman from last year, so they're not dead. That's not
Mhm.
even close. But if they're not at the apex and at the forefront of the box office, then do they just occupy second place, third place? What's the relationship between this genre and potentially other genres that can come in and fill that void?
Man, I think we'll see over the next couple years. I think we'll be telling of what happens, because I really do think it's in the hands of the studios making superhero movies and what they make it. The reason that Guardians and Across the Spider-Verse is so good, it's like, oh, they're superhero movies, but there's so much shit in there we've never seen before that make them good movies. And to Daniel's point, there's so much DNA being interwoven between a lot of these other superhero films. You're like, dang, I feel like I just kind of seen that thing. And, to your point, Jordan, that's what makes it more mid fatigue than anything. Oppenheimer and Barbie are what they are because we've never seen movies like them before. That's why they are what they are. And I think we're just caught up in a weird superhero genre right now where we feel like, I don't know, where I guess the studios feel like we have to include some of that DNA on the safe side. You know what I mean? Of like, oh, we can't do anything too crazy. But what's interesting is that's how comics work. We know good comic runs, and we know nothing about the comic runs in between. You know about Batman the Long Halloween. You know about all these there's so many bad comic runs in between because they're probably doing some of the same boring shit that some of these movies are doing in real time. We're just seeing it on a movie level. Comics go through this exact same thing, man. And I think it's just it really does take a reality check, but it also takes risk. It also takes figuring out what people want to see. And I think when what we are also seeing in real time is when you take risks, it most of the time. So as of right now, most of the time, it's been pretty successful, right? When people take those risks. And again, Cross Spider-Verse is nuts. That movie is crazy. There's so many things in there have never been done before. There's a lot in Guardians that James Gunn was doing that had actually never been done before. It's very stylish, you know what I mean? And so I think as moviegoers, as people who do like superhero content, I think we're looking for some of those things, some of those risks to be taken. Because now what is kind of not necessarily taking the spot, but what does feel like it's on the come up, right? Is some of those video game things, some of those proper video games and toys are kind of going crazy right now. Last of Us feels really good. Gran Turismo just came out. You know what I'm saying? There's a TV show about black Twisted Metal right now. There's a lot happening in the video game genre, in I guess now the toy genre with Barbie and some other upcoming projects. But it just feels like they're taking risk on those projects as well. They're not just being like, let's take some superhero DNA and ingest it with something else. They're like, no, this is new. You've never seen this before. And that's what's keeping the ball rolling in some of those other types of films. So I really think it's really on the filmmakers of these studios that determines if superhero films are going to go to the second and third spot when it comes to type of movies that would be successful at the box office. But if they stay in the same thing they're doing right now, not taking enough risks, or again, sometimes you go overboard. I think Quantumania was a big ass swing. Don't get me wrong. Quantumania was a swing for the fences. Let me tell you, it's not always going to work, but you can't be afraid when it doesn't work. You know what I mean? And I think that's what I'm afraid of. That's why in my mind, I'm like, they might have to go to the second or third spot. I, in my right mind, can't see Marvel going, that was a swing. Let's go back into our old ways. Secret Invasion. I'm just kidding. No, but I really, that's just what I think is going to happen. And so I'm hoping they don't do that. I'm hoping people keep, again, trying to make tasteful content with taking risks, because I think that's what's going to take for that superhero genre to stay number one. And if not, they're going to get booted by some of these other fresher projects coming out.
DC has also historically been a victim to that, of putting out riskier projects, riskier takes on characters. Fans reject it, or it becomes polarizing, and then they become gun shy and all of a sudden revert back to previous ways, or they try to adapt to a formula that's successful elsewhere, like the MCU. And then we just see that now it just doesn't work because you're obviously leaning towards something that isn't necessarily your strong suit. But I think the superhero film genre has just fallen into the trap that every other media form has fallen into over the past 10 years. And that's oversaturation. That's really what it is. Like, you look at anything literally that we experience now, we are inundated with endless amounts of things all the time in every form of media: music, video games, TV, film, social media, whatever you want to say. There is countless amounts of information and opportunities available for you to dive into that stuff. And at a certain point, everybody's going to say, okay, I'm not choosing that, but I'll choose this. I'm going to stay away from that, but I'll go towards this. You have to make choices, because there's no way that any one person can consume everything that's available. And now superhero movies are just a reflection of that. Once we got the boom with the MCU and things became really successful, Danny, to like what you said, phase 3 was really them hitting their stride, and hitting a stride that we have not necessarily seen out of any other franchise in Hollywood history. And then Avengers Endgame happens, and the MCU effectively is over. Like, it ends. That's really the culmination of everything that we have been wanting and waiting for. And then you have to reset, which they kind of do, but then they kind of don't. They more so say, let's expand and let's grow. And they greenlight 35 TV shows and 75 more movies. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, this is a little bit more than I was asking for. Now I have to like keep up with this on a 52-week a year basis. And I think that just becomes way too much for people, on top of the DC stuff, on top of the stuff that we get from Sony. There's still TV shows, there's animation, people still read comic books, video games. At a certain point, you have to make choices. And when you get a movie that isn't necessarily breaking any new ground, perhaps like a Blue Beetle, I think a lot less people are just going to choose that. And they're going to lean towards those experiences that feel groundbreaking, that feel fresh and feel new to what we've been saying this entire time, like a Spider-Verse, like the Batman, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Those things often feel fresh and different and don't necessarily resemble other things that we're getting. But when I get another origin story out there in the landscape, it's like, okay, we've been doing the same formula for about 25 years now. Do we have to do this once more? Like, do we really need another formula of a superhero origin story? I think that's where we are. They've just also reached where every other form of media, is kind of, sort of fallen into. Like, there's no way you watch everything on Netflix anymore. Like, at one point, Netflix had 2 shows. It was House of Cards and Orange is the New Black. Now Netflix has hundreds of shows, and you probably can't name 10 that's on the air right now. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's just kind of like the nature of the business, because once something becomes super successful, they are going to milk. They're going to milk it for everything it's worth. They're going to try to mine that IP for all of its value and really kind of just inundate us with everything that they have to offer. So I think that's where we are right now. And ultimately, who knows what the future holds with James Gunn's DCU. We'll have to sit by and see. Perhaps because it is Superman, that'll be a character that perseveres and sort of restores them to former glory. But we'll have to sit by and wait.
Bust it down, bust it down.
Nah. I advise we back away.
I was down, but they see I'm up now.